All right, guys, we're going to be talking about the 4-point position and the differences between wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Obviously, two different sports. We have different goals for each sport. Jiu-jitsu specifically, we're going to be looking to take the back. What I want to cover in this section of the instructional is the dilemma between Placido's hands and his feet. If he can get his hands to his feet, he can posture up and get out of that. Or if he can get his feet to his hands, he can start to posture up and get out of it. You can see Placido's got a lot of experience in this position. It's no surprise, he has 4 kids. But that's really what this section is going to focus on. The differences between wrestling and jiu-jitsu, what works in wrestling that doesn't work in jiu-jitsu, and what we can steal from wrestling that does work in jiu-jitsu. All right, guys, but in all seriousness, let's delve deeper into the concept of the 4-point position and really how can we negate Placido's feet to hand connections here. So again, Placido's on his side. So I want you to imagine we've got weight on him. Placido can't just posture up here, but if he can get his feet to his hands, he now has more strength to posture up. Or if he can get his feet to his hands again. Sorry, that one was hands to feet. If he can get his feet to his hands. So he walks his feet to his hands. Now he can posture up. So basically he needs to get his center of gravity under him. How can we prevent that? We can prevent the hands walking to the feet with correct shoulder position. If I'm holding Placido up high here, there's absolutely nothing preventing his hands coming to his feet and then starting to get posture. If we get our shoulder beneath Placido's hands, we can make him bear weight. And if he tries to walk his hands to his feet, it's going to be fatiguing that, right? So correct shoulder placement. So I'm not even just talking about getting higher up here. Of course, this is going to make it more difficult. But I want to get my shoulder behind Placido's hands. Sometimes with this pressure, we can even start to lift his hand off the ground. But of course, that's not all we need to deal with. Because again, if we pretend like we've blocked Placido's hand, he can walk his feet to his hands to get back up. So we need something to block that connection there. So we can do that with our knee. So say I'm in a perfect position, Placido can still start walking feet to hands and start to get his center of gravity and he can explode up. Especially athletic guys, right? So we take our upper body position and I can place my knee in front of Placido's knee. So now he's just bearing weight and he tries to walk his feet to his hands. Very, very difficult. So this is how we're going to try to keep our opponents in this position. Look at it from another angle as well. So again, shoulder deep. So we're keeping weight bearing position on him, but I'm getting my shoulder deep and my knee in front. And we make him carry our weight. We want our training partners or our opponents to be basically punished for these positions, right? Placido shouldn't be able to escape my positions on the ground and simply get back up. I want that if he can get back up, it's exhausting for him to do it. Realistically, if our pressure's excellent and Placido gets returned to the mat, gets back up, gets returned to the mat again, he should be exhausted. There shouldn't be quick movements from the mat to the feet. They should be slow, grinding sort of pressure that makes him carry our weight the entire way from the floor to the feet. Basically, if you guys watch Habib fight, that's exactly what he does. He doesn't always prevent people getting back up to the feet, but by the time they get there, they're absolutely exhausted. That's the same pressure we can generate in jiu-jitsu. We can physically break our opponents, submitting them with much, much easier. And again, as jiu-jitsu and wrestling start overlapping more and more, we're seeing these particular skill sets of guys getting back to their feet from wrestling or from MMA. So we need to have the skills and the ability to, when we put people down, we hold them down. And again, if they get up, they're exhausted getting up. And we really can negate their ability to get up by understanding the position. He walks his hands to his feet, center of gravity is under him, he's up. He walks his feet to his hands, his center of gravity straight up. So we can prevent those things with perfect positioning. So we got our grips, we got shoulder deep, we use our knee to prevent his leg walking further forward. Alright, so let's talk about how we can return them to the mat from the 4-point position, right? So Placido's in the 4-point position. Well, obviously the maintenance for this position is, again, to prevent his hands coming to his feet or his feet coming to his hands. And that's how he's going to get a center of gravity under him to push it back up. So what our goal here, first of all, is to put as much weight on Placido as possible to fatigue him. Which again is why once we get them into this 4-point, we're not staying behind them with a rear body lock, but we're running to the upper body. Because when we maximize the weight on Placido's upper body, that's going to fatigue him a lot more than if he carried our weight with his legs. So I would say you shouldn't rush this position. If we've entered this position from the rear body lock, or if Placido's moved here from the turtle position, either way we want to keep him here and keep weight on top of him. So again, that's why we take the rear body lock, we run around the side, we put our weight as close to the upper body as possible. And again, we keep him here with the knee block and by placing our shoulder underneath. The way we're going to return them to the floor is to use our shoulder to try to lift this arm off the floor and drag it out. And what we're going to do with the foot is we're going to place our foot onto that foot, so that as we do that, Placido can't continue to walk and keep this balanced position. So we're going to jeopardize one post and prevent this post from taking up the slack. So we're in our rear body lock. We've run around to the side. I'm never going to pick Placido's arm off the floor here with my elbows. So we want to get our shoulder as deep as possible. From here, we can start to lift that arm. But again, if we only lift that arm and we don't monitor this foot, what's going to happen is this Placido arm lifts, his left foot follows. It's going to replace his weight distribution and he's going to remain stable in the position. So I want you to combine that with stomping on this foot. So I'm just going to step on this foot so that Placido cannot take another step, or at least not take another step very easily. So when we come around, I put weight on Placido, I'm blocking the knee. I get my shoulder deep under his armpit. I put my foot onto his foot and we start to lift this arm. And I start to circle my weight back and around. And that's how we're gonna exhaust them first of all, and it's how we're gonna return them to the mat. So we'll look at it from this side as well, right? So when I lift the shoulder, I'm moving this direction. I'm moving out and around, moving towards the arm that I'm taking off the ground while stapling his foot in position. So shoulder depth, foot onto their foot. So Placido tries to keep his weight here. We can get him to the floor. So again, don't be tempted to fall down the body. Placido can turn around, or it'll be easier for him to stand up. As soon as we bring him back down to this position, I want you to put your chin over the top. Try to keep weight on top of the mat. So again, we were making him carry weight. We return him to the floor and we make him carry our weight from the floor. And that's why if they go from turtle to 4-point again, they're going to be exhausted in the process. So guys, that's a high percentage way of a jiu-jitsu based mat return from the 4-point position. All right, guys, let's talk about the Kosoto, using a Kosoto hook to attain a mat return, right? So in terms of circumstances where this would be good, would probably be against opponents that are much bigger or stronger than you. Because like our first mat return, we still have to rely on having enough body weight to put pressure on their upper body and to lift that arm. But again, sometimes with jiu-jitsu, we have such big open weight divisions that some of these techniques are going to struggle when we have a 30 to 40 pound weight difference. But something like a Kosoto hook, you're gonna have a much better success rate against bigger guys because they are, it's less expected and we're attacking their base from a different angle. We're not using our body weight against their upper body weight. We're gonna stretch their base so wide at the feet that we're gonna get in that return. We're gonna get them to take a knee basically. So what I'm trying to do with my Kosoto hook is hook this leg in such a way that we're gonna place their knee to the floor. That's gonna be step one. And you can already see that based on Placido's body position here, his base is gonna be jeopardized in the direction where his foot was. And that's how we're gonna get him to go from basically a 4-point position to a knee to a hip. And we can pull him from this angle once we've got the knee to the floor to get Placido to take a hip, which is great because it's basically the top of the hierarchy for positions we want to put them in from a mat return. So using the Kosoto hook is a great way to achieve this position with minimum fatigue on your body. So we've got our rear body lock. We've come around to the side. I'm still putting weight on Placido, but maybe I didn't have enough leverage or strength to get this arm off the floor to return him to the mat. So we're gonna look to wrap our inside foot around the ankle, and we're gonna drop to a knee, hooking that foot. Once we get him to a knee, you can see I'm already on top of Placido here, but it might not be in my best interest to follow this up by jumping on top. I might lose position. You can see I'm already falling down Placido's body as a result of the Kosoto hook, but it's easier for me from here to grab a hip and place a hand on the floor and start pulling him to a hip. From this position, it's gonna be much easier for me to start getting weight over the top. Whereas we come back one step, if I drop Placido to a knee here and I'm back here, it's a good chance he's gonna 4-point again before I get weight on top in such a way to keep him in this position. So again, we're hooking with our ankle and dropping to a knee for the Kosoto hook. I place Placido to a knee, and immediately, before he can 4-point, we're hitting his hip, taking a hand post, and bringing him to the floor. And immediately, we're getting into a position where we can achieve head height, which is going to increase our ability to consolidate this scramble. Guys, let's talk about one of the biggest problems jiu-jitsu guys have when they try to translate their skills to MMA or really wrestling style opponents, right? And that is when we get a 4-point position on someone, what a lot of people will do is they'll try to grab a seatbelt and jump hooks in. And that can work, and it can work against jiu-jitsu guys, but for generally speaking, in this modern age of Nogi, where guys have translated these wrestling skills or basically MMA skills of getting back to the feet a bit better, we generally lose that position. So I'll get Placido to jump on my back for this. So from this 4-point position, if Placido starts securing a seatbelt, it's actually easy for me to start walking back into him and shucking him off the top, or really even as he holds the seatbelt, I can just start getting an underhook and start circling to his back. So again, that's if he takes the seatbelt before he jumps on. But also, if he takes this seatbelt and he jumps on my back, even with good hook position, all I need to do is start walking my hands to my feet and start bouncing. And you see Placido starts losing the top position. So again, another defensive skill to keep in mind. Anytime you're in 4-point, you always really try to walk your hands to your feet or your feet to your hands. So from that position, that's going to help me stand. It's also going to prevent Placido's back take from that position, or back take sort of maintenance to keep a dominant position. What I would say, the concept we want to remember here is Placido wants to stay behind my arms to maintain control. So again, because of the scope of competition in jiu-jitsu, we make decisions based on scoring points, where in reality, it probably wouldn't be the best decision to make. Due to the point structure of jiu-jitsu, with Placido, I'm in a 4-point position, Placido's looking to win the match, he would be tempted to jump hooks, and he can do that. But in the scope of really just pure positional jiu-jitsu in the gym, rolling jiu-jitsu in the gym, I would say it would be in his best interest to return me to the mat, to a position where I have less ability to defend and I have less counter options. So again, it follows the hierarchy we've been talking about throughout this whole instructional product, is that the higher your opponent is off the ground, the less control you have. So again, when we're talking about rear body lock, we have 4 layers here. We have standing rear body lock, 4-point rear body lock, turtle rear body lock, and the best of all, your opponent's on a hip. If you can bring him to a hip, an unathletic position, your chances of securing the back go through the roof, right? So if we think about that concept and we apply it to the 4-point position, in the scope of a competition of jiu-jitsu where points are being scored, it would be in Placido's best interest to potentially take a risk and jump to try to place 2 hooks in. Again, you might think of this under certain circumstances, especially if it's near the end of the match. It might be more in your best interest to jump for those hooks. But again, a lot of jiu-jitsu guys see a back take scoring potential. They see an opportunity and they go for it. And I would say it is a high risk, sort of high reward maneuver. But if we weren't thinking about points and we were just thinking about controlling and submitting our opponent, the smartest decision would be to return them to the mat. But again, because of what this instruction is going to provide, and that is all options from these positions, I just want to preface this by saying you're going to lower your risk by focusing on returning them to the mat. Basically, again, the same concept from the front head. The higher they are off the ground, the less likely we are to submit them, and especially the less likely we are to control them. So I'll get Placido to jump on my back just because of the weight difference here, but we're going to talk about a principle called short hook, long hook, right? So even if Placido abides by the rules of not taking a seatbelt, but keeping his arms behind my elbows here, and he jumps his hooks in, if both hooks are the same depth here, it's still going to be easy for me to shake Placido off the top. Obviously, Placido's going to have a little more control because he's under both armpits. So again, just visually think about this, right? If he throws 2 hooks and he's under both armpits, he can, in a way, hold himself up to a certain degree with the grip on the armpits. If he had a seatbelt here, he's immediately falling off. So again, the first thing we need to do for this position is don't jump the gun to a seatbelt where we think we could strangle someone. Stay behind the arms. The second is a concept called a short hook, long hook. So if Placido jumps these hooks in, when he does this principle of short hook, long hook, so that is he takes 1 hook narrow, 1 hook deep, he attains a better controlling position. Much harder for me to start shaking Placido off. If he goes 2 even hooks here and squares them up, you can already see how without me even doing anything, I add in a bounce. He was already falling, we throw on the bounce, we get him to fall off. But again, we're trying to understand short hook, long hook. So when you need to dive for a back, you need to take a point scoring position quick in the match, or maybe there's times running out. You have to stay behind both arms, so double underhooks. We maintain the rear body lock style grips. And when you dive, 1 hook is short, 1 hook is long. And you're gonna see how it's very difficult when I do this correct, when Placido does it correctly, for me to shake him off. Very, very difficult. Even if I get my hands to my feet, Placido's real tight in there, right? So this is what we're going to do to increase the likelihood that if we were to dive in this risky position, that we're gonna actually keep it when we get there. So first of all, don't go for the seatbelt. Always stay behind the arms. Stay behind the arms unless we can get an opponent on the hip. Unless they're on the hip, absolutely stay behind the arms. If you have to dive for hooks, 1 hook is short, 1 hook is long. If your hooks are even, you're actually gonna increase the likelihood of their escape working. And if you grab a seatbelt and you have even hooks and you dive for the back, chances are you won't even keep it long enough to ensure that you score those points anyway. All right, guys, so we talked about jumping hooks in a 4-point position. Again, I want to preface it to remind you of the risks of doing so. High risk, high reward movement, and a movement that probably only makes sense in the scope of a point scoring position. Again, to me, the risks do outweigh the reward, right? So obviously if we do jump hooks, we are behind the arms And we do have this, the short hook, long hook. So Placido dives on. But now we still have a problem. And this is the problem I want to explain in the context of competition. Because Placido, he's not in a position to strangle me here. If he lets go and he starts going for a strangle, there's a good chance he's going to fall off, right? So again, this is how we do things in competition that we don't necessarily do in other situations. Say if we're rolling in the gym, again, it would make much more sense, or if there were no points, make much more sense to return me to the mat, and then Placido can take the back. So we have an issue from this position. We can score the points, we can get to the back, but what do we do next? And we have to be very careful here, again, because Placido is floating in the air, and the closer my hands are to my feet, the more chance he has of falling off, right? So there's a movement called a power half Nelson, which Placido can utilize on me. Again, get Placido to do it just because of the size difference here. But what he can do with that power half is he can force me to basically do a forward roll and give him a better position on the back where he could actually apply strangles without risk of losing position. So we'll look at it from this angle here. So what Placido can do is he can take one arm out, he can connect that behind my head, and he can take a palm to palm or an S grip style grip, either or. And what he can actually do with the elbow of the arm behind my head is he can slide that up a little further to the crown of my head here and start to force me to do a forward roll. So basically, Placido's in the 4-point. What we're basically getting him to do, imagine Placido's structurally sound here, very strong. I'm trying to force his head basically underneath his own armpit there. And again, this is something we can utilize on bigger, stronger opponents or bigger, stronger training partners, because although their neck is going to appear very, very strong, to go against my entire body weight and with a palm to palm gable style grip, we're using our elbow, the top of their head, we will be able to force their head to bend. So I'm going to do it on Placido one time, just to hopefully don't break his neck. So again, we're under both arms. When I dive over, short hook, long hook, right? I choose to keep one hook, one underhook, right? And the other one comes over the top. I get a grip with a palm to palm, gable, or this S grip here. And the trick here is I don't use my elbow at the base of Placido's neck. That's where his neck is most strong. I use my elbow at the top, and we can start to force a forward roll and get to a much stronger position to start attacking strangles. So again, we need the power half, especially in the context of competition jiu-jitsu, because when I'm in a 4-point, Placido wants to dive hooks. What first and foremost he's choosing to do that for is for points. It's not really to put him in a better finishing position. But if he does dive to that position, he needs the power half to get me back to the ground to a safer spot where he can strangle me. So again, jiu-jitsu guys make the mistake. They go seatbelt instead of rear body lock, and they dive hooks, and they think they're going to be able to strangle their opponent from there. But generally speaking, they fall straight off. So again, my first priority, if I have Placido on the 4-point, return him to the mat. Not just to turtle, but to a hip. That is priority one. But for the scope of competition, I need to dive hooks. I'm going to dive hooks, short hook, long hook, stay behind the arms, and I'm going to use a power half to force him to do a forward roll. So obviously be careful drilling this with your training partners. Be careful even doing this on a training partner that's going to resist everything. Make sure they are aware that if they resist this movement, they could severely injure their neck. So really, we're guiding their neck into a forward roll position and hoping that they will play ball with that. All right, guys, so let's talk about how we attack the back, basically land back taking positions from the turtle position, right? So if Placido is a turtle, obviously we've been progressively bringing them down to this point. Again, in pure jiu-jitsu, this position will come up a lot, especially as people defend guard passes, they'll choose the turtle, right? So I want to show you some back takes and some ways to control the position that first and foremost prevent Placido getting back up, and we take his back. But again, most jiu-jitsu people will teach a series of back takes from here where they've got a seatbelt and they're sort of side on to their guy here. But really, we're talking about a dangerous position because again, Placido can hit a Olympic roll from here and rolling through, or he can start to tripod here, and you can see he starts to circle back into me. It's hard for me to maintain this position, right? So again, when we're attacking from the rear body lock in the turtle, we are behind them here. This is going to be our safest position. This is our base position from here. So we need to do some things to keep this position, because again, we've hit such a strong position, and perhaps even we had this, they got up, we returned them down to here. The longer we're here, the more aggressively they're trying to escape, the more fatigued they're going to get. Again, you would see this sort of stuff in a match with Habib. He just exhausts his opponents by riding them from these positions. But again, even if I'm on Placido's back here, if he builds base correctly, he can still start getting back to his feet. So if we reverse engineer how he builds base, we can use upper body and lower body grips to prevent Placido coming back to a 4-point position, right? So first of all, Placido's in the turtle and he's going to start climbing with his upper body. He gets to a hand. He's getting to a more athletic position. So I want you to watch, pay attention. So we come back, he's on his turtle. What he does to get back up is he takes his hands wide. He starts building base, starts getting his head up. And then in terms of his legs, to start lifting these legs, right? Placido starts climbing. He turns his knee out and the other knee in, and he starts climbing to 4-point. So if we come back, let's look at his legs one more time. So he climbs the hands wide, and what he's going to do with his first knee that comes up, it's going to pivot out. He opens his hips wide. So if we can prevent Placido's hand coming out, and we can prevent his first knee turning out, he's going to have a huge amount of difficulty in getting back to a 4-point and ultimately getting back to his feet. So we can do basically a wrist ride from here. So I can take a scoop style grip and I can pull his hand to his chest. Now, if he tries to get back up into one hand, first and foremost, it would be pretty easy to throw in a strangle hand from here. But again, Placido would have to be insanely strong to have no 2 posts and still start climbing back up. So that's immediately the first grip we want. I wouldn't recommend going straight for a seatbelt here, because even though we're behind the hips, he could still start climbing base here. And then he can be in a more athletic position. So to minimize that, the grip we want to take is this style of a hooking, scooping grip here and pulling his hand to his chest here. Now as Placido's trying to climb back up, it's going to be much tougher and much riskier for him to have this approach. We've added something into the equation that he's going to need to fight to get back up. And now let's look from this direction. What can we do to his legs that's going to prevent him climbing? So a quick refresher, for him to get up, he turns his knee out. He pivots his knee wide. That's how he starts building base. So we can actually use a crab hook to capture this calf here. So we hook it with the inside of our shin here, and I apply pressure out. Now when Placido is trying to stand, very, very difficult here. And again, if we have this in combination with the wrist ride, and Placido is trying to get up, he's basically can't move. He's basically exhausted from this position. And you can see he's already started falling to a hip here to try to minimize my pressure on his knee, and the way he's trying to get up with that pressure in combination, he's making him fall to a hip. And again, if we can get him to a hip, that's the top of the hierarchy. In terms of control, hips best, turtles next, 4-point, followed by stand. So again, if we follow our principles of control that leads to submission, we want to maximize our control. And that means taking him to a hip, which would be an unathletic position. So again, when behind someone in turtle here, we want to be taking a wrist ride. So we want to be controlling one of these wrists so that Placido can't hand post with it. And then in combination, we want to be taking a crab hook with the opposite or same side leg, because Placido now cannot pivot to get his knee up. If he does, he already starts falling to a hip here, which is exactly where we want him. So again, because modern no-gi jiu-jitsu was developed from an IBJJF base, with IBJJF competitors coming across, we borrowed a lot of techniques from the gi that don't translate well to no-gi. And if they, even in the scope of the few wrestlers in gi IBJJF, there are unknown movements these people do to the IBJJF based grapplers. So now as modern no-gi grappling progresses, we have to change some of those principles to adjust for the MMA fighters and wrestlers that are implementing similar techniques within the no-gi grappling sphere. And again, first and foremost, always stay behind the arms. And if we bring him to a turtle or a hip, we keep him in a turtle or a hip. And again, we're borrowing techniques from wrestling. We've got the wrist right here. And we're using a crab style hook to prevent Placido attaining a 4-point position. We're also wearing him out, bringing him to a hip from there. All right, guys, so now we're going to be talking about the best position we can put him in from this turtle position. Again, ordinarily, jiu-jitsu guys would try to take people's back from here, right? So that would be basically sort of the modus operandi for jiu-jitsu guys, because that's how it's done in the gi. Again, take a seatbelt, get one hook, try to get the second hook, right? But again, when we come to no-gi without the gi, and also I would say superior athletes in a way, because again, we're getting guys from MMA, from wrestling, come across to do no-gi grappling, and they have more athletic responses, and those athletic responses are hard sometimes for us weak, unathletic jiu-jitsu guys to control. And I would say that if we try to take the back on a guy from turtle, we haven't exactly minimized their options as well as we could have. The best place to have Placido to attack the back would be if we can put him on a hip. Because for Placido to clear this position and get into an athletic position, he's going to come back to turtle and come up and start 4-pointing and stuff, right? But again, the further we bring him from here, even if we could get him to his back and underneath, the less athletic they're going to be, right? So how can we get our training partner or opponent to a hip? The way we're going to do that is I'm going to hop to one side, I'm going to cup his hip, I'm going to take a hand post, I'm also going to use my knee to block Placido's knee. That's going to be key, because if I pull Placido without a knee block, his knee just moves towards me. He slides to me, exactly, and he remains with excellent base. If I use a knee block, I can pull him to a hip and he can't adjust easily. What I want you guys to pay attention to is I've basically pulled him to a hip, but I've remained above Placido here. We don't want to be so eager to bring them to a hip that we fall over, because Placido is in a great scrambling position to get on top of us here. So again, when we do it, we want to stay upright. So we're behind, knee block, I pull Placido, and I sit to a butt. I don't fall to a hip myself, where we're more in a neutral position and we're not really taking advantage of this. And I find this one works particularly well against guys that do try to 4-point, because as Placido comes up, his base does narrow and it's easier for us to knock him over. So again, I want you to practice with your partner on both sides. Remember, we're taking a hand post and we're going knee to knee. I pull and I hop my hips back, but I stay upright, I stay above Placido. Because say I messed up this entry, Placido starts moving away from me, I'm still on top of him here. Whereas if we fall to a hip, he could potentially explode away from me or explode back into me. It's some of the best times we have to hit this is off a scramble. So with your training partner, if your training partner provides resistance from a static position, you are going to find that sometimes this is difficult to hit. Placido is very strong. Sometimes we do have trouble, but because of the scope of our positioning, it's easy for us to return back to the top and potentially even start hitting it on other sides, getting movement. For me, the best time to hit this would be off of a go behind. Immediately, say we threaten our high wrist, Placido defense, we get behind, and we immediately pull him to a hip and attain head height here. So again, although when you drill this statically and your training partner resists, it's going to feel difficult. You can try to perfect the technique, but I would say the best time to hit this is within a scramble. Because the second I hit a go behind on Placido, what's he going to do? He's going to immediately start trying to get up to a 4-point, and momentarily his base will narrow, give us the opportunity to bring him to a hit. All right, guys, let's look at option one when we take the back from getting him to a hip, right? So Placido's in total, and obviously we've done our sort of hip return here where we pull up the arm. First thing I want to do is get my knee inside. This is, we want to take away the space between basically their elbow and their hip. The only way Placido would have maintained space here is if he basically allowed himself to completely collapse. But because of the nature of people trying to keep their base, as Placido's in total, when we pull him to a hip, he stays on an elbow as if he's loading up to return to the turtle position, which allows us to slide a knee in. And because we're behind him, very easy to secure a seatbelt here. And again, the seatbelt is safe here because there's really no way I can fall off. And there's also no real way for him to turn his left arm into an underhook because basically my knee is in the way. Whereas a seatbelt turtle, they're still going to have a chance that this arm can come inside this hip here, especially if he started to 4-point. So again, we've got him to a hip, we place the knee inside, and we're free to take this turtle position. What we want to do is basically follow the principles of diagonal control. So you can see with our seatbelt, we've got an underhook on this side. What I don't want to be doing is securing a hook with my leg on the same side for total control. Basically, we want to have underhook control in here through the seatbelt. So we're really looking to secure this leg here as our first hook. But again, it looks kind of complicated to find that hook, but we can use a crab hook on this outside leg to lift Placido's hips as I go to place the hooks. So when we've got this seatbelt here, I slide into my butt and I hook a crab hook here. So if Placido lays down for a sec, this is the hook we're looking to attain. Some details on this, again, just like we did with the standing rear body lock where we were doing a mat return with our knee in this position, we're not aiming to be as close to the knee as possible. Placido could actually extend here quite easily and strip it. We're trying to take the hook and sliding it down, getting our knee a little closer to their knee. Gives us much better control, and we're turning our knee in. So when we take that crab hook and we sit down, it's easy for me to elevate Placido's bottom leg off the ground and replace this bottom hook. And now you can see, following the principles of diagonal control, we have the bottom hook and basically top side underhook control. And the way we can turn this straight into a body lock is to keep this crab, extend it straight, and we can bring our foot across. Because again, if we didn't have this crab hook and Placido kept his knee to his chest there, it's going to be hard for me to throw this hook in. But we can extend and make the space to throw that foot in and secure the body triangle. So that crab hook is obviously very, very useful from multiple positions here. So we've taken him to a hip, knee block, I pull Placido, and I end up with my knee inside this space. We can take the seatbelt because again, we're not in a position where Placido could athletically 4-point or take an underhook, and that allows us to slide underneath him, hook this leg here, hook my outside leg to his outside leg. Remember, we take that crab, we turn our knee in. I pull Placido on top of me just to place this hook inside. Again, following principles of diagonal control, we have an underhook on this side, we have the bottom hook. We extend this top leg and we place the hook in for a body triangle. So basically, once we get them to a hip, that is our time to start pursuing the seatbelt. And once we have the seatbelt, the knee in position, we're free to now attain the bottom hook opposite to our underhook seatbelt control. All right, guys, so now we're going to look at the foot slide option. And actually, this is basically this style of sliding back take's been around for a very, very long time. But I would say most people don't get good at it because of how they train, right? So say in the average training room around the world, people's priority in the training room is don't get submitted. That's their priority. So when you put someone on a hip like that, generally speaking, a traditional jiu-jitsu guy is going to just accept that position and try to prevent hooks. But obviously, within the scope of competition, guys have a much greater urgency to turn to turtle, and turn to turtle with a lot of power, with a leg scissor, right? So there's this disconnect between the training room and the competition mats, basically. And what I find is people will have a hard time getting good at this because they don't have the appropriate responses in the gym. People basically shell up in the gym and try to prevent hooks rather than risk turtling to go into an escape and therefore risk getting their back taken, which a lot of people consider the end of the match in the gym. In a gym setting, someone takes you back, you're going to freak out, you're going to be really defending that. In competition, you would happily risk turning to turtle because you would understand that those point scoring positions likely end the match, right? So let's take a look at the response that causes this, right? So really, I mean, a lot of wrestlers, MMA guys know that they would rather be here than here. So within that narrow scope of control and that understanding, Placido, with that mindset, is going to try to turn back to turtle. Because again, if we follow the hierarchy, he turns to turtle, goes to 4-point, builds back up to a standing position by walking his hands to his feet, and now he's back up. So we understand that from that scope. Obviously, the fact that scoring points changes that means it's likely the end of the match in competition. We have different responses built up, right? So let's have a look at how Placido gets back to his feet here, right? Back to his turtle here. Imagine, right, because it's going to be true that I've got a lot of weight on Placido here. If I didn't have weight on Placido, he could merely basically keep a pretty close elbow-knee connection here when he gets back to his feet, right? So imagine there's no weight on Placido, very easy for him to get back to his feet and minimize the space here. Whereas if you imagine Placido's got a lot of weight here, which is where you're going to be, the only way Placido's going to get up is with a leg scissor. And that allows him to come back up. But of course, what that does is it separates his knee and elbow. And when he comes back up in that manner, he's leaving all this space here for us to potentially slide a hook in. So when you drill this with your training partner, obviously when we drill, we're not resisting each other, we're not fighting each other. But you have to put enough weight in that your training partner has to leg scissor. That's the key to this concept. Again, that's the disconnect between competition and the mats in the gym where people are training as a hobby, is that we need this appropriate explosive response. And again, make sure that your training partner understands the leg scissor. So even initially, you could just practice holding a hip. They try to get up without the scissor, and they're not going to be able to get up. Now they get up with the scissor, and they're going to, generally speaking, overpower that weight pressure. Again, I want you to understand that, really understand it, because it highlights the concept of allowing space here. So when I pull Placido to his hip, if I'm just not putting any weight on him and he comes up and I try to put my hook in, there's no space. If I'm making Placido carry my weight, my elbow's connected to his hip here, he has to scissor. And as he scissors, I can stomp on that outside leg. And as he comes up, I can slide my leg inside, and immediately now we've got single hook back control. Sometimes you can be lucky here because of the nature of standing on their leg. You can pull them back to a hip and you've got that bottom hook. And of course, just like the last technique, we could elevate and start to throw our body triangle in. But generally speaking, against your average training partner, you're just going to merely end up with a single hook back control out of this, right? So I'm stomping this leg, my foot is sliding in front of my knee, and we're ending up in this position here, single hook. So I still have to be careful here because Placido could potentially tripod and get into an athletic stance, and we might fall off, right? So a little detail I like to do is keep his foot pointed wider than his knee. That's going to make it harder to tripod. For him to tripod, he wants his knee pointed wider than his foot. So I keep this pressure here until I grab our power half Nelson. And again, we use that power half to force a forward roll style of movement, and we get him to a less athletic position from which we can take the seatbelt and we can start placing our body triangle in. So again, we've pulled him to a hip. Placido starts coming up. I'm stomping that foot and sliding my foot in front of my knee. We've got our single hook. I'm trying to extend this leg to make it difficult for Placido to start tripoding. And we can take a power half Nelson, C grip, gable grip. Remember, the elbow is not at the base of the neck. Placido is pretty strong here with his neck. The elbow is at the top, and we force a forward roll. Got our underhook. We can switch to a seatbelt, and we can start looking for the body triangle here. So again, if you remember anything from this technique, remember to tell your training partner to give realistic responses and leg scissor to come up. Alright guys, let's talk about another variation of back take once we get into a hip, right? So you can see this time I took a Khabib style grip and I've gone around the neck, basically locked and loaded, ready to strangle as soon as I secure a meaningful grip in terms of the lower body to prevent him rotating out of an immediate threat, right? This would be my preferred style of back take from this position, purely because I can stay on top of Placido here, right? So if I bring him to a hip and grab a seatbelt and slide in, I'm off of Placido. I keep him in an unathletic position, but basically I'm pulling his weight onto me here. And the secondary one is when he turns up and I stomp. This one is equally good, but I do simply come up to a single hook. And guys are excellent at defending second hooks when we have a single hook from the back. That skill set guys have these days of preventing a secondary hook, and they develop that skill set just in terms of preventing point scoring positions in points tournaments, right? This third one is my preferred because it's maximum control and we keep weight on him at all times. So when we bring him to a hip, I take this Khabib style grip. I'm basically crushing him here with my body weight, right? Placido's in a very weak position. He's on his hip, and we can easily turn this knee sort of leg riding position here into a hook, right? So I crush him with my knee and the foot falls in. And from here, combination with these two grips, Placido really has nowhere to go. He can't turn very easily at all. Very difficult for him to prevent this second hook because he's distracted by the strangle. If the strangle hand wasn't there, he could potentially use this hand to prevent the hook coming in. So we're distracting him with a submission threat that allows my foot to just fall into place. And now a detail from this side to prevent you guys injuring your own knee. my foot's not wide. My foot hugs the back. And when I sit back for the body triangle, I sit my butt behind my foot. I keep Placido sat up and I fall to this outside hip. And then we can secure the body triangle. You guys can imagine if my foot was here and I tried to sit back this way, you're gonna have insane pressure on your knee and hip here. So to prevent that, tuck your foot, sit behind your foot, and then don't fall flat to your back, roll to the other hip. And it's very easily now to secure this body triangle. So again, this has been my option of back control if I was dealing with a very, very good opponent, because we are talking complete weight distribution. We are talking a Khabib style grip and a strangle threat to distract the secondary arm. We're minimizing their options, increasing the panicked response because we're leg riding them. Leg riding is horrible. It creates a sense of urgency for you to move with your opponent. So I pull in for the hip, and from here, Khabib style grip, and I'm start riding over the top of Placido here. Start threatening strangles. We can even use this grip to start collapsing into the ground, and it creates a sense of urgency in Placido to get moving. We can sit behind the foot and we can start to set up the strangle. But another thought process, once we get someone here, is there's no rush. Placido's options are limited, so we are free to grind him out from here. If I took Placido's back when he was fresh and he had good hand fighting, we might end up having a battle for a while. So quite often I like to leg ride. I like to start applying pressure to sit him down here. Placido starts fatiguing, trying to fight out, and it's very easy for us to start securing this back take. So what I really want you to think about when you're taking lessons from this instructional is the idea that we don't always beat opponents with technique alone. Sometimes we have to use that technique to put them in positions that fatigues them, makes them carry out weight, makes them panic, especially panic. The key to submission, I believe, is a panic response where they have this urgency to move. It's why you see a lot of guys get submitted at the end of the match when they're trying to Hail Mary sort of movement to recover that match. The faster and more erratically they move, the quicker they're going to fall into a deep submission. All right, guys, let's talk about how we could use basically a hand assist or a hand reinforcement on a long hook, right? Because again, guys are very, very good at preventing the second hook, right? So if I have a single hook here, even if I get Placido down to a hip, we still have this crazy battle to get this second hook in. And obviously guys are very, very good at it. And I think what's encouraged this is, first of all, the point scoring position is we have to get two hooks. Either Jeff or ADCC, or most reasonable rule sets, a body triangle would work as well. So what I want to show you is a way we can basically use a hand assist and a long hook to try to bypass that battle. Because again, we're in a points event, we want the points, and if we're going to strangle someone, it's going to be much better to have a really solid control over their hips, right? So anytime I have a single hook on Placido, we're going to do an exaggerated one first of all, right? So if Placido's left space, instead of throwing it inside, I throw it to my hands. I throw it cross body and catch it on my hand. Obviously, I don't want to fall off there, right? So what's key to keeping myself up is that my secondary knee covers this hip here. So when we throw this hook in and I have my knee against the hip, I'm not falling off of Placido here. If my knee's on top of his back, I'm going to start to fall, even with the hand assist. So we keep our knee pinched, and when we throw this hook in, secure it with your wrist and keep your knee in place. We're going to try to pull Placido backwards, right? So I'm going to use my second leg to hop and bring him down to a hip. Again, bring him down to an unathletic position. And of course, it's going to be very easy for me to now throw a body triangle because my foot is already cross-body. And if it's inside here, I have to be able to bypass this knee to even get a second hook, let alone secure the body triangle position. When our foot is reinforced here, Placido tries to prevent the body triangle, there's really nothing he can do to prevent this movement. We're already so deep in the position here. So again, I want you to keep this in mind anytime you can throw that secondary hook, right? A good example would be, even if we're just trying to move Placido to a hip, and we don't get much movement because their base is so good, but they leave this space here. We could throw it, and instead of placing it as a single hook, we throw it cross body. We take a post with our hands, and we place our knee outside the hip here. Again, if it's on top, we're just gonna fall off and lose position. So we place it outside the hip, and then we can start to use that foot to hop and pull Placido over sort of the back right of his base here. And we're gonna jeopardize his base, and again, secure that body triangle, and then start looking for control from the back. But it's just a concept that really allows us to skip those battles. Obviously, we want the body triangle, but if we have a single hook, even with diagonal control, we still have another battle to win. And that battle is going to be to get 2 hooks inside and then get the body triangle, or really beat that leg entirely and get the body triangle. When we throw a long hook, reinforce it with our hands, we guarantee that we can get the body triangle. And if we use that long hook, reinforce with the hand to move backwards over his base here. So think about it, he's in total, we secured our long hook. We're basically pulling him back this way to a hip. And again, just like we did with the initial knockdown, we're doing the same thing here. Exact same thing, we're pulling him back over the weakest angle of his base. And then again, because of the nature of the reinforced long hook, very, very easy to throw the body triangle. So again, just a shortcut to a stronger position to avoid some of those key battles. All right, guys, let's look at another option to take the back from turtle. Perhaps they're not leaving any space for a hook, so we could do our long hook, hand assist trick. Perhaps their base is too good for us to pull them to a hip, so we still need options from this position of turtle, right? So the core is a technique. Obviously, we've got the seatbelt, right? Or we've got the body lock here. The claw is a great way for me to eliminate Placido's ability to throw this arm over my head as I commit body weight back, right? So I want you to visualize it here. If I were to fall back here and pull Placido onto me, he could throw his right hand around my head here and basically take a headlock or top position, yeah? So when you visualize this movement, what it's going to prevent, provided we keep obviously our ear behind his shoulder here, obviously I don't want to be leaving space for him to throw this arm around my head. So when we place our right ear, the same side ear as the same side claw behind their back here, and I pull them onto us, Placido tries to throw a headlock in, impossible, right? And we can throw our second hook. Another detail we need to use to complement this back take, right, is obviously we've got the claw. The claw is going to prevent him headlocking us. It's going to allow us to safely transfer his weight on top of us while also staying behind him, right? The other grip we're going to do is something in wrestling they call a spiral, right? So when I use the hip hand to punch my arm straight here, we can start to get some lift on this side. So I take a deep grip, obviously not a deep grip here, but again, because my weight's over this side because of the claw, it's gonna be hard for him to hit that Olympic style roll. But when we place this deep, if I punch into his hip here, you can see his hip starts to lift. So obviously the Olympic roll would be difficult anyway. So we're combining this spiral ride grip with the claw, and also we're using our knee to block Placido's knee on this side. So he's turtle, our knee's blocking this. So imagine the combination, spiral ride, it's gonna elevate this hip. We're gonna have a knee block so that when we pull his hip over it, he doesn't extend this knee out for balance. We have the claw that allows us to take a higher risk of movement without their ability to take a headlock position. So we're in our body lock here. We start reaching for the claw. A great time to reach for the claw is when Placido starts to come up to his hands here. Because as he comes up to the hands, it allows us to create a tighter grip. The more space between his shoulder and his head, the weaker the claw is going to be. The less space between the shoulder and the head, the stronger the claw is going to be. So we're combining a spiral ride, a knee block, and we're pulling them onto us. And I immediately transfer to this crab hook, because what the crab hook allows me to do is allows me to place this bottom hook in by lifting his hips off the ground. If he brings his knee back over the top, if I didn't have this, if I didn't use this crab hook, I'd never get this hook in. I would have to throw the top hook, and again, the top hook's going to be hard to throw because he's going to be preventing it. And here, there's a good chance Placido rolls away from me, and we lose the position because all we had was the claw. So we still need to get control over the lower half of Placido's body. So a great chance is as he starts climbing up to a hand position, we've got our spiral ride, our knee block, and our claw, and I pull Placido onto me, transfer and weight to this crab hook where we can place the bottom hook in. We can start securing a seatbelt, and we can transfer to the body triangle. So again, the claw is a great technique to prevent guys using a headlock escape. So we're using the claw, a spiral ride, and a knee block. Basically a combination of techniques to ensure that we can still take the back of an opponent that is sort of difficult to off balance or place a single or far side hook in.